Hello? Oh, well, it came on. I just tapped it and it came on. I know, I just tapped it and...
Well, let's just leave it on.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
Sing us two. There.
Yeah, it's just like it's the golden thread. That's what I usually do. I kick something or I just... Yeah. It solve itself, yeah. Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Looks like we've got a great turnout here tonight. My name is Tony Follis. I'm the manager of elections for the City of Hamilton. We're pleased to have representatives from the Government of Ontario here with us tonight. We've got Joan, Carolina, and Terry. They're going to be giving us a run-through of mostly what's in the Act, I would say, and the changes that are going to be involved in this election. And then, of course, there are quite a few that have come to be. They'll let you know during the process when you can ask questions. Because this is being live streamed, if you could come down to the table here and ask your questions at this point. And as I say, they'll identify when it's time to, or if you have any questions, when it's time to come down. All right? So right now, I'll hand it off to them, and have a great night, ladies.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone. How are we doing tonight? Okay. First of all, my name is John Egwonwo. And here with me today are my colleagues, Carolina Khan, and our senior municipal advisor. We are from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, and we're here today to provide some information about the upcoming municipal election. I want to thank Tony and his team for hosting this session today and also for inviting us. Thanks, Tony. Before I proceed, I just want to provide a little bit of housekeeping. I know Tony mentioned that we would take questions at the end of the session, so if you have any question during the process of presentation, you can take notes down, then we'll open the floor for questions afterwards. And before I go on, I wanted to find out, are there any school board trustee candidates in the room today? How about third-party advertiser candidates that would love to register? No potential third-party advertiser in the room? So I guess we will just skip through the slides that speak to that. Thank you.
There may be people watching that want to see those slides, so I understand how third-party advertising works.
Okay.
And the school board as well.
Sure. Okay, fair enough. So we'll just cover everything. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay. So before we start our presentation, we normally provide a disclaimer. So the slides that are being provided today is provided by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, like I mentioned earlier, and we're here to provide information about the upcoming municipal election. I want you to know that we're not here to provide legal advice. We're here to provide information to keep you abreast of the rules and regulations and also the guidelines that you should be aware of as you proceed with your decision. Also, for more specific information, we would advise that you refer to the relevant regulations and legislation, which can be found online at www.elaws, elaws is electronic.laws.gov. Once you go to e-laws, and the first page that comes up will take you to e-laws, and then you can type in any of the legislation you want, and it will take you there. As local facts and circumstances are variable, users should obtain their own legal and professional advice when specific issues arise. So like I said, we're just here to provide as much information as we can, but when it comes to having legal explanation of those legislation, we would advise you to consult a legal professional. Sorry, before I move forward, I also like to let you know that we're going to talk about the various guidelines, but we're not here to talk about the rationale behind any policy that we will be talking about here today. So like I said earlier, we're just here to provide the general information to support you. So the slide that's on is just showing some of the topics that we're going to be covering today. So we'll be talking about the roles and responsibility of elected officials. We'll be talking about municipal staff and also third-party advertisers. We'll talk about the eligibility rules, the nomination process. We'll talk about campaign finance, compliance audit, voters list and voting proxy. We'll talk about scrutineers. We'll talk about recounts, and also we'll provide a slide at the end of our presentation on some very relevant resources that you can get some more information. Some general information I would like you to be aware of is that the clerk is in charge of the municipal election. The clerk has broad authority to run the election in the municipality, and that includes preparing public notices, establishing polls, creating forms, getting information out to the voters and candidates, and appointing election workers to assist throughout the process, all of whom will be required to take an oath of office. To take an oath. In terms of provincial legislation, you will want to look at the Municipal Election Act and regulations, the Municipal Act and regulations, and also the Education Act for school board trustees, and also the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So these are some of the acts you should be conversant with as you prepare to run for office. And these are all available online through the e-laws. Like I mentioned earlier, at the end of the deck, you will find some relevant links on the resources slide. It's at the end of the presentation. If you plan to be a candidate, once you submit a nomination, you then have a legal obligation to be familiar with the regulation and also the candidate guides, the third-party advertiser guide, to be able to be conversant with all the rules and regulations you need to abide by. Third-party advertisers also have a legal obligation to be familiar with the legislation and the rules that you must comply with. These legislation, they do not address election sign. Election sign is a local municipal responsibility, and you should know what the rules are, and you can contact the clerk of your municipality to provide you with information regarding the election signs. Third-party advertisers, the rules for third-party advertisers came into effect on April 1st. So third-party advertisers are encouraged to read through the third-party advertisers guide to be conversant with all the rules and regulations around third-party advertising. So why run for office? Local government is a level of government that is closest to the people and is the most accessible and responsive to the needs of the community. You made a decision to throw your hat in the air, and you're thinking that you have what it takes to be part of the council or the school board trustees to support the work they do and also to improve the work at various levels in the community. However, keep in mind that this is a 4-year commitment that will be filled with challenges, excitements, disappointments, hard work, and a great deal of satisfaction. So congratulations. Ontario's municipal government delivers social services, while the ministry provides the legislative and policy framework. The Ontario government sets standards for many local services such as land use planning, building regulation, and social housing. And the province provides funding to municipalities for delivery of some services. The ministry also works in partnership with the municipal sector to support efficient and responsive local governments that are sustainable and investment ready. Local government is a challenging environment, as I would assume we all know, and there's high expectation. However, there are limited resources to be able to meet most of these expectations. That means there's so much to do with less resources. There is a limited understanding of the roles of council and staff, and that's part of why we're here today, to make you, to provide information about the roles of head of council and, the roles of council and also municipal staff. Before we get into an overview of the Municipal Election Act and the changes that came into effect, I would provide a brief summary of the role of elected municipal officials and the role of staff. The role of council. It is the role of council to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interest of the municipality. They develop and evaluate the policies and programs of the municipality. They determine which services the municipality provides. And also they ensure that administrative and controllership policies, practices, and procedures are in place to implement the decisions of council. Council also ensures the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, including the activities of senior management of the municipality. They maintain the financial integrity of the municipality. They also carry out the duties of council under the Municipal Act. There are numerous other acts that are also important that you should be conversant with. And three of those most common acts are the Planning Act, the Education Act, the Conflict of Interest Act. So I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with these, and an easy way to get a hold of these acts is through the e-laws. More on the role of council. It is also the role of council to conduct meetings. They pass bylaws. However, keep in mind that when they are passing bylaws, this is done as a collective group, with all members each having one vote. The role of council is also to maintain the financial integrity of the municipality. They develop policies with respect to the following issues listed there. So for accountability and transparency, for public notice, for delegation of authority, for hiring of staff, disposition and sale of land, procurement of goods and services, relationship between council and staff, protection of tree canopy and natural vegetation, and pregnancy and parental leaves. However, the last three policies there will come into effect March 1st, 2019. I want you to also keep in mind that municipalities are created to be responsible and accountable governments with respect to matters within their jurisdictions. And each municipality is given powers and duties under the Municipal Act and many other acts for the purpose of providing good government with respect to those matters. What is the role of the head of council? The head of council acts as the chief executive officer. He presides over council meetings so that its business can be carried out efficiently and effectively. The head of council provides leadership to the council. He provides information and recommendations to council on policies, practices, procedures to ensure transparency and accountability. The head of council represents the municipality at official functions. He or she carries out the duties of the head of council under the Municipal Act or any other act. It is important to note that council makes decisions, not any individual council member, including the head of council. To clarify, the head of council always has a vote. There is sometimes confusion on this point in the media and with the public, who think that the head of council can only vote in the case of a tie. Another clarification regarding voting. Refraining from voting counts as a no vote. This is spelled out specifically in legislation in the cases of recorded votes. I also want to point out that although the legislation refers to the head of council as the chief executive officer of the municipality, this may be confusing to people with a business background. The head of council actually has very few powers that can be exercised independently of the rest of council, except where specifically delegated in cases of emergency or in the context of procedural matters. During a council meeting, the head of council has no greater power than any other individual member of council. So now that we know about the role of the head of council, what is the role of a municipal staff? It is the role of the municipal staff to implement council's decisions and establish administrative practices and procedures to carry out council's decisions. It is the role of the municipal staff to undertake research and provide advice to council on the policies and programs of the municipality. The municipal staff also carry out duties required under legislation and as assigned by council. In addition to what we have on the slide, there are municipal statutory officers who have some duties and responsibilities that are described in the legislation. These duties cannot be changed or limited by council. For example, the clerk is responsible for preparing meeting agendas and minutes, and they are also responsible for the municipal election. Generally, the role of staff is to support the council and to operate the business of the municipality within the policy framework provided by council. Council sets the policy direction and staff implements that direction. This slide here provides a summary of the roles I've been talking about, the role of the head of council, the role of other council members, and also the role of the municipal staff. So you can just have this handy so do you know the roles of the different, of the head of council, other members of council, and also the municipal staff. Let's talk about the role of the school board trustee. School trustees are members of the school board. They are locally elected. They are locally elected representatives of the public, and they are the community's advocate for public education. Only the team, that is the board, not an individual trustee, has the authority to make decisions or take action. Trustees are locally elected representatives of the public, and they are the community's advocate for public education. The Education Act creates 4 different kinds of school boards. So as listed on our slide, we have the English Language Public District School Board. We have the English Language Separate District School Boards. We have the French Language Public District School Boards, and the French Language Separate District School Boards. A trustee is often the first point of contact for parents and for the community members who have questions and or concerns about their local schools. A trustee, a candidate for a school board trustee should contact the applicable school board for further information about duties, commitments, and etc. So just as the clerk is responsible for conducting the municipal election, the secretary of the school board is responsible for conducting the school board trustee election. So for more information, I would encourage all candidates for school board trustees to contact the secretary of the school board they will be running for. Let's continue on the role of the school board trustee. So the role of the school board trustee is to establish policy direction. They participate in making decisions that benefit the entire school board while representing the interest of constituents. They are accountable to constituents, the Ministry of Education, families, and communities. So now that we know the different roles of the head of council, the other members of council, the school board trustees, let's look at some of the eligibility criteria. who can run and who cannot run for office. A person is entitled to be an elector at an election held in a local municipality if on voting day he or she is an eligible elector, which means you must be able to vote. So the list we have on the slide shows some voter eligibility. And the first is you have to be a resident and also non-resident owner or tenant or spouse of a non-resident owner or tenant. You have to be a Canadian citizen, 18 years old or older, not legally prohibited from voting, not disqualified by any legislation from holding municipal office. So who is not eligible to run for office? Any person not eligible to vote in the municipality, an employee of the municipality, unless a leave of absence is taken before nomination and the employee resigns if elected, a judge of any court, a member of the Ontario Legislature, Senate, or House of Commons, a person who was a candidate in previous election and did not file a campaign financial statement by the deadline. My colleague is going to speak to us about the campaign financial process much later. Section 30 of the Municipal Election Act states that a person shall not be considered an employee for this section by reason only of being a volunteer firefighter, as defined in the Fire Protection and Prevention Act. If a municipal employee wishes to run for office on that municipality's council, they must take a leave of absence before filing their nomination form. An employee of a municipality who wants to run for an office in a different municipality doesn't have to take a leave of absence or resign, but they should check with their employee, the clerk or the employer, to see if there are any policies that could affect them. Let's talk about eligibility to run for school board trustee. The person has to be a resident within the jurisdiction of the board. They have to be eligible to vote for school board election. On the day the candidate files a nomination, they must be a Canadian citizen aged 18 or older. They must meet any other qualifications to vote for the school board, for example, being a Roman Catholic or hold French language rights. So who is not eligible to vote for a school board trustee, to run for the school board trustee? The following people are disqualified from being elected as a school board trustee. Any person who is not eligible to vote for the school board, an employee of any school board who has not taken an unpaid leave of absence, municipal officials, a judge of any court, a member of the Ontario Legislature, Senate, or House of Commons, a person who was a candidate in the previous election and did not file a campaign financial statement by the deadline. So, third-party advertiser. A third-party advertiser is an individual, corporation, or trade union that is registered in the municipality to promote, support, or oppose a candidate or a yes or no answer to a question on the ballot. A third-party advertisement means an advertisement in any broadcast, print, electronic, or other medium that has the purpose of promoting, supporting, or opposing a candidate or a yes or no answer to a question on the ballot. Like I mentioned earlier, the third-party advertising rule came into effect on April 1st, 2018. The third-party advertising framework intends to introduce a level of fairness and accountability around third-party advertising. Keep in mind that third-party advertising has always been on in previous election, but this year it's been regulated. That's the difference. So it's always been on, but the province is now regulating the activities of third-party advertisers. So who is eligible to register as a third-party advertiser? The following are eligible to be registered third-party advertiser in a municipal election: an individual, a corporation, or a trade union. And who is not eligible to register as a third-party advertiser? The following persons and entities are not eligible to file a notice of registration. The first, a candidate whose nomination has been filed under Section 33 of the Municipal Election Act, a federal political party registered under the Canada Elections Act, or any federal constituency association or registered candidate at a federal election endorsed by that party, a provincial political party, constituency association, a registered candidate, or leadership contestant registered under Elections Finances Act, a Crown in Right of Canada or Ontario, a municipality or a local board, any group or association that is not a corporation. So regarding any group or association that is not a corporation, this includes groups like associations or clubs that are not incorporated. In addition to not being able to register, groups that are not corporations also cannot do third-party advertisers during the restricted period. Although spouses of candidates, family members, and campaign staff are not prohibited from registering as third-party advertisers, keep in mind that there may be optics issues here. So now let's talk about the nomination process. Nomination can be submitted beginning Tuesday, May 1st, 2018. Nomination day is Friday, July 27th, 2018, between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Withdrawal of a nomination must be filed with the clerk's office in writing before 2 p.m. on nomination day. It is recommended that a candidate personally attend at the clerk's office to withdraw a nomination. If a candidate is in the hospital or incapacitated, this may not be feasible. The clerk must certify nominations by 4 p.m. on Monday following nomination day. That will be July 30th, 2018. The nomination filing fee is only refunded once the candidate submits a completed financial disclosure of all the financial transactions made up to the day the nomination was withdrawn. Local election policies may state a candidate must personally attend the clerk's office to withdraw a candidacy. So like I mentioned earlier, if a candidate is in the hospital or incapacitated, they might not be able to do this. If a candidate withdraws a nomination, they are still required to file a campaign financial statement covering all of the financial transactions made in the campaign. If they have not spent any money nor raised any funds, they can click on Form 4, which is to file your financial statement. They can click on the box and sign the form, and that will be it. If a nomination is withdrawn, the candidate is entitled to a refund of their nomination fee only after they file their financial or auditor statements by the required deadline. An issue that is raised infrequently but is of importance nonetheless is What happens to a campaign which has been opened and a candidate decides to run for a different office? The ministry has provided a few examples showing what happens when candidates change their mind about which office to run for after they have filed a nomination paper. So I encourage you to look up the third-party advertiser guide as well as the candidate's guide for more information on what you can do when you change your mind on the office to run for. More on the nomination process. Starting on the first date in May, which is May 1st, when the municipal office is open, nominations could be submitted to the clerk from anyone who meets the eligibility criteria to run for the office. So that will be Form 1. So candidates must complete Form 1, which is the nomination paper, and submit it to the municipal clerk with the filing fee. So for head of council, that will be $200. And for other offices, that will be $100. Please note that this filing fee can be paid in cash, certified check, or money order, and it should be payable to the municipality. Or they could pay by any other electronic method of payment that the clerk specifies. The clerk must be satisfied that you are eligible to run in order to certify your nomination. The clerk can ask you to show identification or fill out an additional form to prove that you are eligible to run for that particular office. The nomination form must have an original signature. If your nomination is not certified by the clerk, your name will not appear on the ballot. So let's talk about the 25 signature requirement, and this is a new requirement. Municipal council candidates are required to obtain 25 nomination signatures on Form 2. So I've been talking about Form 1, Form 2, Form 4. So if you go to the candidate's guide, if you're running for a municipal office, or if you want to register as a third-party advertiser, if you go to the various guides, so the candidate's guide or the third-party advertiser guide, if you read through, you will find the links to the various forms. So you click on the link, and it takes you to the form you need. So if it's Form 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, so just click on the link, and it takes you to the link. So for the 25 signatures, the Form 2, you would have to print or photocopy the pages because you would need 25 signatures. So you have to get a signature per form. So you have to either print more or photocopy to get the number of forms that you need. The requirement for nominators to sign nomination forms does not apply to school board candidates. Nominators can nominate more than one candidate and are not required to vote for that candidate. Nominators must meet the eligibility requirements of a municipal elector at the time they sign the nomination form. In a ward system, which I know Hamilton is a ward system, the nominator can be anyone who is eligible to vote in the municipality, not just the ward. Both the clerk and the candidate are entitled to rely upon the information provided by the nominator. If the nominator did not meet the eligibility requirements when they signed the documents, then they could be held accountable under the penalties section of the Municipal Election Act. If the candidate wishes, they can provide more than 25 signatures. So if you've already submitted your nomination form for one office and then you change your mind and you want to run for another office, this slide speaks to running for a different office. Occasionally, a candidate changes their mind and decides to run for a different office. You can only run for one office at a time. If a candidate files a second nomination, the first nomination is deemed to be withdrawn. If a candidate decides to run for another office and they have already collected the 25 endorsement signatures, they can use these endorsements for the other office. So for the case of Hamilton, which is a ward system, if the candidate decides to run for a different office on the same council or school board, and one of both offices are elected by ward, the two campaigns must be kept separate, and two financial statements must be filed. Registration of third-party advertisers. Individuals, corporations, and trade unions will be required to identify themselves and provide mandatory information on all advertising. There is no registration fee for third-party advertisers. A third-party advertiser would register in the local municipality with the clerk responsible for conducting an election. Third-party advertisers in support of or opposition to any candidate being elected by voters in that municipality. Registration for questions on the ballot would be included in third-party advertising. For a regular election, the registration cannot be filed earlier than May 1st, 2018, and cannot be filed later than the Friday, October 19th, 2018, during the clerk's hours. Once registered, third-party advertisers may advertise in support of or opposition to any candidate being elected by voters in that municipality. This would include council, trustees, and directly elected upper-tier candidates. If an individual wants to influence voters in more than one municipality, for example, over the 3 municipalities covered in a specific school board trustee election, he or she would have to register in each of the 3 municipalities and conduct their activities as 3 separate campaigns. Section 88(7) of the Municipal Election Act states that if the municipality is satisfied that there has been a contravention of the Act, that is advertising in a restricted period, as well as requirements therein, Section 88.3 and Section 88.4, then it can ask the third-party advertiser to remove the advertisement or discontinue the advertisement. So now that you know about the role of head of council, the role of other council members, the role of school board trustees, the role of third-party advertising, and also you know who is eligible to run and who is not eligible to run, let's talk about campaign finance. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Carolina, to walk us through the campaign finance process.
Thank you, Joan. Okay, just to check, everyone can hear me okay? Yes? Yes? Okay. So as Joan said, I will be going over the finance related aspects of a campaign. And just to reiterate, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So any questions that you may have as I'm reviewing the material, please do note them down and we'll get to them at the end. So, in regard to contribution, generally a contribution includes money, goods, or services. Campaign accounts are only required if the candidate or third-party advertiser raises or spends money. So in the case of acclamations and campaigns where no funds are raised or spent, there is no need for opening a campaign account. Trade unions and corporations will no longer be eligible to contribute to candidates' campaigns directly, although they can participate as third-party advertisers or make contributions to third-party advertising campaigns. And I should just make a note here before I go any further. I'm going to refer to third-party advertisers as TPAs for the remainder of this section, because it is a bit of a mouthful, and TPAs, third-party advertisers, we're all on the same page. TPAs will generally need to follow the same rules for raising campaign funds and financial reporting as candidates for office. The practice of municipalities of providing candidate contact information on their websites is not a contribution, and that is a clarification that has been put in place as of this time around. Candidates, on the other hand, can accept contributions from individuals who are normally resident in Ontario and the candidate themselves or their spouse. Third-party advertisers, TPAs, may accept contributions from individuals who are normally resident in Ontario, trade unions that hold bargaining rights for employees in Ontario, and corporations that carry on business in Ontario. And regarding to the TPA rules specifically, the rules for determining if corporations are deemed to be a single corporation have been simplified. Corporations are deemed, it's been simplified, so corporations are deemed to be a single corporation if one of the corporations controls the other, directly or indirectly, or if all of the corporations are owned or controlled by the same person or groups of persons, either directly or indirectly. Neither candidates nor TPAs can accept contributions from the list on the slide, so either federal or provincial political parties, constituency associations, or a registered candidate in a federal election, or a leadership contestant. They cannot accept contributions from federal or a provincial government, a municipality, a school board, a business, or a group that is not a corporation. In regard to volunteers, often campaigns will run with the efforts of volunteers. And the value of services provided by those volunteers is generally not considered to be a contribution for campaign purposes. However, there is a caveat to this. So if a professional volunteer provides services to a campaign for which they would normally be paid, so if they are a graphic designer and they do graphic design work for a campaign and that is their profession generally, then the market value of the service that they have provided to the campaign must be recorded as a contribution and would be reflected as a campaign expense for the purposes of your financial statements. Contributions to a campaign over $25 may be made by check or money order or by a method that clearly shows where the funds originated. If goods sold to raise funds are sold for $25 or less, that amount is considered campaign income and not a contribution. Donations under $25 at a fundraising event are not considered to be contributions. Ticket price of a fundraiser is a contribution, sorry. Receipts must be issued for each contribution and should include the name, address, amount, and date of the contribution. And no anonymous contributions, except for pass the hat collections, can be made unless it's $25 or less. And for clarity, fundraising functions are events or activities held by or on behalf of a candidate for the primary purpose of raising money for the candidate's campaign. The individual contribution amount has increased from $750 in the past to now $1,200, but the aggregate amount of $5,000 has stayed the same. Since candidates and TPAs are required to inform contributors of contribution limits, both candidates and TPAs may want to include the limits on the receipts that they provide to their contributors. is now a limit on the amount that a candidate for a municipal council can make to their own campaign, and this applies to contributions made by the candidate's spouse. Contributions must be deposited into the campaign account. A receipt should be provided, and contributions reported on the financial statement. So the self-funding limit for municipal council candidates is based on the number of electors voting for the office to a maximum of $25,000 per candidate. The highest self-funding limit that anyone could possibly have is $25,000. So, if the formula works out to a number that is over $25,000, they still only get a $25,000 limit. If the formula works out to be less than $25,000, then they get whatever the formula works out to. And there is no self-funding limit for school board candidates or for third-party advertisers. So in terms of borrowing, you may only receive a loan from a bank or another recognized lending institution in Ontario, and it must be paid directly to the campaign account. Loans may only be guaranteed by the candidate or their spouse, and generally these rules are the same rules would apply to TPAs. For certainty, you cannot receive a loan from family members or from any corporate accounts that you may have access to. And if you and your spouse guarantee the loan and the campaign does not repay all of it, the remaining balance is considered to be a contribution. Regarding campaign expenses, for the purposes of the Municipal Elections Act, the following are considered to be campaign expenses. So for candidates, this would be costs incurred for goods or services by or under the direction of the candidate, wholly or in part for the use in their election campaign. For TPAs, it's costs incurred by or under the direction of an individual, corporation, or trade union for goods or services for use wholly or partly in relation to third-party advertisements that appear during an election in a municipality. So there are certain prescribed forms that are used for the purposes of municipal elections, and Form 4 would be Form 4 for candidates and Form 8 for TPAs. Would give you a few examples of what campaign expenses would include, and so we would recommend that you review those forms in advance just to get a sense of what a campaign expense would be and where it would be reflected on a financial statement. So further, candidates and TPAs should become familiar with campaign expense provisions. Campaign expenses are those costs incurred by a candidate or a TPA during a campaign. The nomination filing fee is no longer considered to be a campaign expense, and it's not included on the financial disclosure form. Goods and services donated to the campaign are also reflected as expenses and must be reported on the financial statement. A receipt must be provided for the fair market value of those goods or services donated. Only nominated persons or registered third-party advertisers are able to incur expenses during a campaign period. Payment of any campaign expense must be drawn from the campaign account directly, and a receipt providing the details and proof of payment must be obtained. All expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form. So as I mentioned, Form 4 is the relevant form for candidates, and Form 8 is the form for TPAs. Just as background regarding campaign inventory, if you ran in the last election and you want to use leftover goods such as signs or office supplies, for example, You would have to determine the current market value for those goods and what it would cost you if you were to purchase them today. And those amounts would be recorded in the financial statements as an expense. If at the end of the campaign, if you end up with leftover inventory and it becomes your personal property, but if you want to store them for use in a possible future election, any cost for storage would not be considered campaign expense. Deficits from prior campaigns will no longer be carried forward after the 2018 election, and any deficits for the 2018 election are the responsibility of the candidate. The costs associated with the auditor's report for the purposes of a campaign is a campaign expense, and expenses related to the preparation of the auditor's report that accompanies the financial statement can be incurred after December 31st. And just a quick note, an auditor's report is not required if the total contributions received and total expenses incurred during the election campaign up to the end of the relevant period are each equal to or less than $10,000. So that would be the threshold. Regarding spending limits, we'd like to refer you to Ontario Regulation 10197, which is an associated regulation for the Municipal Elections Act. And it talks about spending limits for the head of council, which is $7,500 plus 85 cents per elector, as well as for all other offices, which is $5,000 plus 85 cents per elector. The maximum amount for parties after voting day is 10% of the above calculated amounts. So these amounts are calculated twice by the clerk of the municipality. So upon a candidate filing the nomination form, the clerk shall calculate the spending limit based on the number of electors on the voters list as it existed on nomination day in 2014. That would be the preliminary spending limit that candidates would receive once they file. However, there will be a second calculation which will be based on the number of electors on the voters list as it exists on September 15th of 2018. And this calculation must be provided to candidates on or before September 25th of 2018. Whichever number is higher between the preliminary and the final spending limit calculation would be the one that you would use, and the clerk's calculation is final. So as I said, you will get two different amounts, the preliminary estimate and then the final estimate. And as a candidate, you could use the higher of the two amounts. If a third-party advertiser has registered in more than one municipality, each registration is a separate campaign with its own spending limits. Right, and they also have the same provisions in relation to the 10% spending limit for parties and expression of interest after voting day. So items not subject to the spending limit. So I won't go through the whole list, but some of the main ones are fundraising event or activity, expenses related to a recount, audit and accounting fees, expenses related to a compliance audit, and so on. They're all on the slide. I believe you all have copies. Most expenses are subject to the spending limit, as I've been discussing, except the ones on this list. Expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from campaign spending, from the campaign spending limit, but in order to qualify as a fundraising function, an event must have the raising of money as its primary purpose, so that's an important distinction. Campaigning events at which incidental fundraising takes place does not qualify as a fundraising function. So similarly, for instance, a brochure promoting awareness of a candidate that contains contact information to make campaign contributions eventually wouldn't qualify as a fundraising function. So third-party advertiser spending limits. So as I said, third-party advertisers would also get 2 spending limits, a general spending limit, as well as a separate limit for expenses related to parties and expressions of appreciation after the close of voting, which is set at 10%. Ontario Regulation 101-97, which I already mentioned, includes the formula for calculating TPA spending limits as well. So this is set at $5,000 plus 5 cents per elector to a maximum of $25,000. And the formula is based on the number of electors to vote in an election in the municipality. So it's not by ward, it's based on the number of electors in the municipality. So campaign finance rules. There's a few references in the slide in terms of where you can find the campaign finance rules for candidates. So please make note of those as well as for TPAs. We always recommend that you do go back to the actual legislation and read the provisions yourself, in addition to, of course, attending these kinds of sessions, because you need to be very well familiar with the provisions of the Act. And as well be aware of the responsibilities regarding your election spending and accepting campaign contributions. A question we have been asked at during each municipal election cycle is whether there is a requirement for every candidate to have a chief financial officer, and the answer is no. However, we do suggest that you familiarize yourself with the sections as well as the prescribed forms for filing your financial statements. This will ultimately help guide you in organizing your records and how they would ultimately need to be reported. Accurate record keeping is a legislated requirement, and candidates and TPAs must keep records of receipts that they issued for every contribution, the value of each contribution, whether the contribution is in the form of money, goods, or services, the contributor's name and address, every expense including the receipts obtained for each expense. And all campaign financial records must be retained until after November 15th, 2022, which is once a new council and/or local board has been sworn in. All contributions and expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed by the candidate on the relevant prescribed financial forms. And just to be, just for clarity, these rules would apply whether to candidates, well, in the case of candidates, whether they are elected to office or not. The rules apply to everyone. As a best practice, candidates and TPAs should ensure that receipts are stored in a secure place, have a multi-part receipt, make sure that receipts are sequentially numbered, consider including contribution limits on the receipts, have the bank provide monthly statements and canceled checks for the account, produce duplicate deposit slips for every deposit, and maintain a petty cash fund. So this is all part of ensuring that you are maintaining accurate records for financial reporting purposes. So in regard to campaign advertisements, candidates and TPAs cannot cause an election campaign advertisement to appear unless they provide the following information to the broadcaster or publisher in writing. So as you can see, that includes the name of the candidate or registered TPA, the name, business address, and telephone number of the individual who deals with the broadcaster or publisher under the direction of the candidate or registered TPA. The TPA must also include the name of the municipality where they are registered. No broadcaster or publisher shall cause a campaign or third-party advertisement to appear unless this information has been provided to them. The restricted period for third-party advertisements is May 1st, 2018 until the close of voting on voting day on October 22nd, 2018. So the references in the Municipal Elections Act for you to look over. For candidates, it's sections 88.3, and for third-party advertisers is 88.4. And it's good to note those down so that you understand, you are able to go back to the actual legislation to understand your responsibilities. The broadcaster or publisher of a third party or candidate advertisement shall in turn maintain records containing the following information for a period of 4 years after the date the advertisement appears, and shall permit the public to inspect the records during their normal business hours. So this includes the information that they would have received, so the name of the candidate or registered TPA, name, business address, and telephone number of the individual who deals with the broadcaster or publisher, as well as the copy of the advertisement or the means of reproducing it for inspection, and a statement of the charge that was made for its appearance. We've touched on financial statements a bit, but we'll go into that a little bit further. Candidates and TPAs must file their financial statements on or before 2 p.m. on Friday, March 29th. If a candidate or TPA feels that they will not meet the deadline, they are able to apply to the courts for an extension prior to the March 29th, 2019 deadline. Section 88.25 of the Municipal Elections Act states that all candidates are required to file Form 4 with the clerk, regardless of how much or how little they spent or fundraised for their account, or for their campaign, sorry. If you filed a nomination form as a candidate, you must file Form 4, even if you withdrew your nomination or were acclaimed, which we've touched on a couple of times. A candidate may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error up until the filing deadline. That is perfectly okay to do. The clerk is required to make public a report of which candidates filed financial statements and which did not. So it will become a matter of public record if you filed nomination papers and then later decided not to file a financial statement by the deadlines. All contributions must be reported, and the names of contributors who contribute more than $100 must be reported on the financial statement. So again, you can refer to Form 4 for candidates and Form 8 for TPAs to see the level of detail that is required for the different areas of the financial statement. The clerk is required to make financial statements available to the public in an electronic format free of charge. And financial statements must include an auditor's report if expenses or contributions exceed $10,000. So in the case that you do need an auditor's report, if you have exceeded expenses or contributions by over $10,000, that auditor must be licensed under the Public Accounting Act, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. Candidates and TPAs can file their financial documents at any time after voting day and before December 31st. Filing effectively will end your campaign period. So this will make it easier for acclamations and campaigns where little or no expenses incurred. Clerks will be required to report whether candidates and TPAs have met their financial filing obligations and publish that report on the municipal website or in any other electronic format. And this needs to be done by April 30th in the case of a regular election. So in this election, that needs to be done by April 30th, 2019. Clerks can determine the conditions for electronic filing of financial statements. The nomination fee is only refundable if the financial statement is filed on time. So that would be on or before March 29th, 2019 by 2 p.m. And just as a point, there is no registration fee for TPAs. A candidate or third-party advertiser who misses the filing deadline may file within a 30-day grace period, provided that they pay a $500 late filing fee to the municipality. A candidate who chooses to exercise this option and file within the 30-day grace period will be subject to that $500 late filing fee, and they will also lose their nomination refund. In relation to a possible surplus, the entire amount of a campaign surplus must be paid to the clerk. A candidate or TPA, however, is entitled to a refund of any contributions they or their spouse may have made to their campaign before the filing of the financial statement and the payment of the surplus to the clerk. The clerk holds the surplus monies in trust for use by the candidate or the TPA in case there is a compliance audit. If there is no compliance audit, the surplus will then become the property of the municipality or school board. Moving on to compliance audits. Every council and school board must establish a compliance audit committee. Members of a compliance audit committee cannot be members of the council or school board, an employee, a candidate in the election, or a registered TPA. The clerk will review contributions and prepare a report for consideration by the compliance committee. So this process is related to reviewing the contributions as they have been reported on the financial statements, and it's not connected to the compliance audit process itself. If it is apparent to the clerk that a contributor has exceeded one or more of the contribution limits, the clerk would report this to the committee, which would then meet to determine whether to proceed with legal action. The legislation does not specify what details are to be provided in the report to the committee by the clerk. Electors entitled to vote in an election may apply for a compliance audit even if the candidate or TPA has not filed a financial statement. The application must be in writing and set out the electors' reasons for why they believe the Municipal Elections Act has been contravened. The application must be submitted to the municipal clerk or the secretary of the school board within 90 days of the filing deadline. And the Compliance Audit Committee will consider the application and decide whether to retain an auditor to undertake a compliance audit of the candidate's or TPA's financial returns. Compliance Audit Committee meetings are required to be open to the public, but the committee may also deliberate in private. Electors will be able to apply for a compliance audit of a third-party advertiser's campaign finances as well, as I mentioned. And the Compliance Audit Committee is required to provide brief written reasons for its decisions. If the auditor's report concludes that a contravention of the Municipal Elections Act has occurred, the committee will then decide whether or not to proceed with legal action. Just as a reference, Section 88.33, subsection 8, outlines that the written reasons for the committee's decision shall be given to the candidate, the clerk with whom the candidate filed his or her nomination, the secretary of the school board, if applicable, and the applicant. And if an audit does occur, the report must be circulated to those same individuals. If a compliance audit is undertaken, the committee will consider the auditor's report. Decisions of the committee may be appealed to the Superior Court of Justice, and a person who believes that a candidate has contravened the MEA may proceed with legal action without first having obtained a compliance audit. So moving on to offenses. Section 90 of the Municipal Elections Act outlines that an offense constitutes a corrupt practice, and a person who commits it is, on conviction, disqualified from voting at an election until the next regular election has taken place after the election to which the offense relates, in addition to being liable to any other penalty provided for in the Act. So, and the slide outlines sort of the official definition of the offenses. When we're looking at penalties in general, the following penalties are available to the courts upon conviction for an offense under the Municipal Elections Act. So for individuals, that can be a maximum fine of $25,000, up to 6 months imprisonment, ineligibility to run in the next general election, or if convicted of corrupt practices, such as bribery, ineligibility to vote in the next general election. For a candidate, it would be the penalties listed above, in addition to fines for excess campaign expenses, forfeiture of office, if the offense is found to have been committed knowingly. And for trade unions and corporations can be a maximum fine of $50,000. So we're in the home stretch here. Joan is going to finish off and keep going with the voters list.
Thanks, Carolina. So I'll just quickly walk us through the remaining slides, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So let's quickly look at voters list. The preliminary list of electors as corrected by the clerk becomes the voters list on September 1st, 2018. The clerk determines how and when individuals can apply to have their name and information corrected or added to or removed from the voters list. The clerk can also remove a name from the list if the clerk becomes aware that a person has died. One copy of the voters list can be provided to each municipal candidate or trustee candidate. Requests must be made to the clerk in writing. Candidates running in a ward are entitled only to that portion of the list that contains the names of the electors entitled to vote for that office. Copies of the voters list are not available before September 1st, 2018. The voters list shall not be posted in a public place. The voters list shall not be made available to the public by posting on an internet website or via any other print or electronic medium of mass communication. Third-party advertisers are not eligible to receive a copy of the voters list. For candidates, only the parts of the voters list that contains the name of the electors entitled to vote for that office. So, for example, if there are wards, the ward candidate would only be entitled to that ward portion of the voters list. More on the voters list. The clerk may require anyone who receives a copy of the list to sign a receipt acknowledging the list is only to be used for the election purposes, and any other use would be in violation of the Municipal Election Act. An elector's name shall appear only once on the list. In a ward system, an elector is entitled to vote only in the ward where he or she resides. Voting proxy. A person who is entitled to be an elector in a local municipality may appoint another person who is also entitled to vote as their voting proxy. No proxy appointments can be made until nominations close. A voter must directly appoint another eligible voter by name as their proxy. A person may only act as the voting proxy for one person unless they are acting on behalf of a spouse, sibling, parent, child, grandparent, or grandchild. The prescribed proxy form must be completed by the individual appointing the proxy. If the municipality is using alternative voting, you should verify with the clerk whether or not the proxy voting is permitted. Let's talk about scrutineers. Only a candidate may appoint scrutineers to represent him or her during the voting and the counting of votes, including during a recount. Third-party advertisers cannot appoint scrutineers. In the traditional election where voting takes place at a poll, the deputy returning officer is in charge of the activity in the voting place, and the deputy returning officer may ask the volunteer to leave, if the scrutineer to leave, if they are not complying with the legislation. Candidates and scrutineers should respect that the deputy returning officer must ensure fairness, access, privacy, and security of the vote. With alternative voting, the clerk shall establish alternative voting procedures. So I will encourage you, the candidates and also school board trustee candidates, to check with the clerk and the secretary of the school board, if you're a school board trustee, if a list of scrutineers' rights is being given to the election staff at the poll. If so, use that list or prepare your own and hand out to each of your scrutineers a list of their rights, which are spelled out in section 47(5) of the Municipal Election Act. There are no restrictions on third-party advertisers being appointed as scrutineers, but candidates should consider the optics regarding the independence or lack thereof of a third-party advertiser. Also keep in mind that there are no age restrictions for scrutineers. Recounts. A recount is automatic if the vote is tied. Councils and school boards have the option of establishing policies prior to the election that also allow for an automatic recount. Council still retains the options to pass a resolution for a recount within 30 days after the clerk has declared the results of the election. An eligible elector can apply to the courts for a recount within 30 days of the clerk's declaration of the results. In all instances, the recount must happen within 15 days of the clerk receiving a court order or council passing a resolution to conduct a recount. And recounts must be held in the same manner as the original count. If I may put John on the spot here, what counting method are you using for this election?
We have a recount policy, but council has not passed anything to further. So it would be in the event of a tie, or the council and school board, someone could go to them or go to the Superior Court.
Okay. So if there's a recount, it's the same method that was used during the initial count. That's the same method that will be used for the recount. So for example, if it was through a tabulator, that will be the same method that will be used for the recount. You can use a different recount to count. You can use a different recount during the recount. So here are some key dates you should keep in mind, and you could print out this page and just keep it handy so you monitor the key dates that are very important. So the opening of nominations and registration for third-party advertisers is May 1st, 2018. Nomination day is Friday, July 27th. Voting day is Monday, October 22nd. Candidate campaign period from when you file nomination until Wednesday, December 31st. And for third-party advertiser campaign period from when you register, which is May 1st, until December 31st. And the campaign financial statement filing deadline is Friday, March 29th, 2019 at 2 p.m. So, like I mentioned earlier, I said that there was a slide with all the resources. So this is the slide that has all the links to the various resources that could be handed to you. So the first one is the e-laws that I talked about. So once you can just type in e-laws in the Google, and once you get the search, you're able to access the various acts that are of importance to you. So for example, the Municipal Election Act, you can find under the e-laws, the Municipal Act, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and for school board trustees, the Education Act can also be found under the e-laws. And with regards to the candidates and third-party advertisers guides, I have the Ministry of Municipal Affairs website there. So once you click on the link, it takes you to the guides, either the candidate guides or the third-party advertisers guide. And as I mentioned earlier, to be able to access all the various forms, you have to go through the guide that is applicable to you. And once you scroll through, you see the various links to the various forms that you will be needing. You just click on it, and then you print out as needed. So we'll now open the floor for questions, and this is our information. If you have any questions for us after today, you can always send us an email or give us a call, and we will be happy to respond. So my colleague is going to come join me, and we're going to be taking questions.
So I believe questions need to be taken at the front for the purposes of the mic, correct? Yep. So if you have a question, please come down to the mic in front and press the button. And just as people are starting to do that, I just want to, I guess, note that if you have any sort of scenario-based questions, like what if I do this particular action, does this apply, does this not apply? Generally, we'll try to provide as much information as we can, but just keep in mind that this is a general information session, and any specific scenario-based inquiries you may have, we may not be able to answer because that falls within the realm of legal interpretation, which we cannot provide, as we said at the top of the presentation. So just keep that in mind as you're formulating your questions to us. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. My question's just quick. So electors can only vote in the ward with which they live. What day is their ward determined? So for example, if someone moves within the campaign period, what day is their kind of address confirmed?
I think you can go right up to voting day. So if you do have a change in address, and on the day of the election you have a change to make, there is usually a way by which that elector can request that change to be made to the voters list. But in regard to how the city of Hamilton handles that specifically, like in terms of how you would go about doing that and who would you talk to, by all means that would be a question for the city.
Yes, you can fill out an application to amend right up until and including election day.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The first one was, when you do the calculation of spending limits, the amount per elector, that's the elector in the ward or district you would be running in if you're not running for mayor, is that?
Right, so if you're running for ward councillor, that would be based on the number of electors for that particular
In that ward.
Yeah.
And the other one's about the, Joan, you touched on this, but maybe you answered it, the a third-party advertiser that's a corporation. Are there any limits around what kind of a corporation it can be? Does it have to be arm's length, or can I just set up a corporation called the Corporation to Elect myself and double my funds available that way? Do you understand where I'm going with that? Didn't nobody think of that yet? I better keep it to myself.
You have to be a corporation that's operating as a business.
In
Business doing
Ontario,
something
yes.
other than trying to elect myself.
That's correct.
Okay, got it.
Yes. Good clarification. Hi.
I'd just like to thank the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and the city for putting this on because it's very informative. And I guess my question relates to if you're running, so right now we're running elections back to back to back, provincial, municipal, and federal. And if you're running provincially right now, which I am, can you make application? So, and I guess it's related to the campaign financial statement. So my campaign financial statement may not be submitted prior to May 1st or by July 27th. So is there provisions for me to run municipally?
That is a good question. Maybe Terry, you have some.
No, I think if you wait till after the provincial election, then you will know one way or another as to whether or not you could run in a municipal election, and nomination day hasn't expired yet because it's not till late July.
Okay, and I guess the second part to the question was the so the provincial election campaign financial statement may not have been submitted yet.
My suggestion would be to check in with Elections Ontario, who runs the provincial election, to get clarification on that whole piece, because that's a different piece of legislation that governs provincial elections.
All right, thank you.
I've got a few quick questions.
Okay.
The first is when will the nomination forms be available? Is it going to be before May 1st or
They're available right now.
available now? Okay.
Yeah, Ontario.ca/municipal elections. They're not right at the front of this page. So if you are a prospective candidate or interested in becoming a candidate, you would click on the candidate's guide.
Carolina? Sorry to interrupt you. We have nomination packages here tonight with all of those forms in them.
Does that,
Even easier.
does
Yeah.
that include the like the signature form or something as well?
It includes everything.
Okay.
Perfect, yeah. Otherwise, just for everyone's reference, if you want to access them online, you would click on the 2018 Candidates Guide, scroll down, and then you could find the electronic versions of those forms.
Okay. Also, would candidates be able to host campaign events on city property, like a rec center, if they paid for a rental room?
So that is a question for the city.
We have a policy going to council within the next 2 weeks. One of those items is exactly what you talked about, and as long as you're paying the same rental fee, we looked at that, but it was decided that it wouldn't look right for candidates to be doing that, so we've not included that in that process. So the answer is no.
Okay. And then I guess the last one would probably be for the city. Is there going to be a ward profile done? Because the last one was done in 2011.
That wouldn't be the elections office who does that, and I'm not sure, but we can certainly find out. I think I can find out right now.
Hi, so once all of the, as of December 1st, once all of the, everyone's been nominated and elected, all the ward profiles will be redone to reflect the new ward boundaries and the changes and all of the details for each ward, and they'll be posted on our website.
Okay. Thank you.
I just have a quick couple of questions as well. So the first one's more of a clarification. So a business that is a partnership that has not yet been incorporated, if they wanted to contribute, it would have to be their personal individual funds?
Correct.
I'm understanding? Okay. And then the second one, so I understand that the federal government passed legislation a few years ago banning groups from sending emails without prior consent, and political parties are exempt from that. So does that apply to municipal elections and candidates as well?
That is a good question. I'm not sure we have that answer, to be honest. I'll be frank with you, but we will look into it and provide those responses to the elections team at the City of Hamilton for further clarification.
Wonderful, thank you.
And also talk to us after and we can give you our contact information. It'll also be on the next slide.
Thank you.
No problem.
I'm not certain this is going to pick me up. Oh no, there we go. There we are.
Pull it down.
There. Hey, there we go. So regarding the third-party advertisers, my understanding for federally and provincially, unions specifically can only advertise to their own members. Is the same thing true municipally?
No, if you are a union, a trade union with bargaining rights in Ontario, you can operate as a third-party advertiser just as any other third-party advertiser may operate.
So they can operate external advertisements?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Any more questions?
No? Going once, twice? Any more? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having us tonight. And if you have any further questions after this session, by all means, our contact information is reflected on the slide, so please feel free to reach out to us individually or our office anytime. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, and I want to thank, obviously, Carolina, Joan, and Terry for doing a great presentation and for sticking around for questions after, too. Thank you very much.